nested context, I'm not trying to use fancy terms for something very simple. I do believe this is an apt description of something that I'm using. And let me go a little bit into details. Let's say, look on the right side. That is basically some company intelligence. This is about private equity fund intelligence. So you have a private equity company. But the interesting thing here is you go from, we want this intelligence, let's just call it data point, right? For simplicity. And we want this intelligence, and then this is the breakout of the data points that we want. It looks like a pretty straight line. And the point of nested context is how you can manufacture certain steps along this line to produce higher accuracy, higher validity data. And when you think about that, right? When was the last time you were really happy with market data you bought from a provider in terms of coverage, accuracy, recency? I actually forgot to put on price here. So many data subscriptions are like 30K a year or 40K or 20K. And if it's proprietary data that you can't get any other way, it's probably priced for a reason and you should buy that data. But if it is something where basically somebody scrapes the web and repackages it, I guarantee when in capable hands, you build on every dimension better data. But it's not, and this is the point I want to make, this direct line from, oh, this is what we want and this is how it should look like. At least for me, that's not how reality looks. To get from, let me show it one more time, to get from this to this is my actual system in place of the nested context that is in between. And I want to make that very concrete. And I also want to talk about why that is the case. Let's go back to this. And this is why I want to use a concrete example. When you ask AI to say, give me the flagship fund and all these data points about the flagship fund for this company, this meaning it's basically then in a Clay table or in Cloud Code or whatever, I absolutely use Clay, just like Claygent Argon is absolutely amazing for these kinds of tasks where it gives you amazing capability of following instructions and actually being able to ingest a lot of data to produce these kinds of outcomes, which is basically what you saw here. This is the Clay table producing this type of data. Anyway, so the point is, when you ask AI, you know what, create this agent that tells me this. At this time, AI, and I'm not just saying directly run the agent, I'm just saying basically create the prompt for this agent. If at this time AI has to figure out, let's just use the word flagship fund. If AI has to figure out, when you ask it, build this agent for me. Okay, what is a flagship fund? What are the rules around flagship funds? What makes it different from a non-flagship fund? Where do I get the data for that? Is that something on the SEC filing, or is that something that only lives on a company's website, or does it live anywhere else? Basically, while you ask the question, and then it will produce a prompt. You plug that prompt into one agent here or another agent there, and it produces outcomes. But the nested context, what goes in here, is I spoke with my client about this is a thing that matters for us. What matters and why? Then the synthesis of okay, these are all the things that I heard, resolve where the team was in disagreement. Where do we have agreement? What is the actual data that we need in the end? This is the part here in the CRM and what you saw basically here. This is really what we want. You need to get really, really clear what you want here for most of these data points. And then this goes through certain domain, I call it always domain research, meaning it's specific to a very narrow domain, not the website domain in that sense. And what it does is, okay, what is the deep research methodology that I'm even using? Because what I want to understand, and this, I just said that in a little bit confusing way. What I mean is, the private equity domain knowledge and the source intelligence are parts of the system before the agent is being built. So what that means is, before I say, hey AI, build me this agent that gives me these data points, I always use the term, I'm kind of elaborating on that, and let me start actually at the end of like, okay, give me deep private equity domain knowledge about fund structures, disambiguation of all of the terms, like what matters, what do the words mean, what do the concepts mean, how does this market, how does this space look like? And in order to get there, I use deep research. And you can kind of see the value of that, because the deep research that produces this private equity domain knowledge is taking like 20 to 50 minutes or something like that. And it compresses it into this foundational document about, in this case, private equity. And this thing even has awareness, the deep research, of you're doing this deep research for this purpose. So what we are trying to achieve, all the knowledge about, in this case, even my client and their world, and how we are going to use this is actually baked into the deep research prompt. So when I run deep research on a certain domain, not a company domain, like on a knowledge domain, then this deep research is actually aware of its purpose. And that creates vastly different, I don't have the time to get into it, but it creates vastly different outcomes or outputs for how good and how accurate this is. And on top of that, I have a source intelligence, which basically ranks, okay, an SEC filing is a 10 out of 10. A whatever, pitch book, public scraping source, whatever, is a, 7 out of 10 or something like that. So in this industry, if you have something on the SEC website, treat it as true. If it's something here, treat it as context, something like that, right? And even that translation into, so I'm not just saying, hey, deep research, tell me everything about private equity. What actually happens is there is a deep research methodology where I say, this is what I want to do, run it through my deep research methodology, which converts it into a specialized, optimized deep research prompt that imbues the purpose for what the output of this deep research prompt is used. That produces the private equity domain knowledge. That produces the source intelligence, what sources matter more than others. And only then this is used to produce an actual agent for that. I'm just going to go in here and give you a quick glimpse at how this specific agent looks like. So this is for Claygen, specifically for Claygen Argon's capabilities. And my system is aware of what are specialized capabilities of certain tools that I'm using, so it can optimize for that. Argon is really good at following prompts and following instructions, and really, I think I said it earlier, it's really good at like ingesting a lot of tokens basically, and it's actually cheaper than running this on a Sonnet or on an Opus. And honestly, complex stuff I would always want to run on the best model. But the point here is, this prompt has so much domain knowledge imbued because it's referencing all these other documents that I'm mentioning here, like what does this domain actually look like? And you know what? Because I'm feeling generous, let's just switch over to what you can see here is the SBC domain 1, which is the document that you see here, the PE domain knowledge. This is this document, and this has been produced specifically to inform the agent that is, or the agent that is actually building the prompt that will be executed. Go in here, and instead of having to come to all these determinations and what does good look like and what does the terminology mean and like what are the written and unwritten rules of this domain, right? All of these things, instead of AI having to come up with all of that when I say, hey, write this agent for me that gives me this data, it's so much easier for it to just ingest this data and incorporate it into the agent build versus having to come up with it on the spot. It's such a powerful concept. Again, I call it nested context because it's all these elements, this chain. You have to look at it as a chain, right? Instead of going from this is what I want, this is what it should look like. Hey, AI, build a prompt for that. It's like, hey, AI, build a prompt for that. And for example, so this is indirect speech, right? Or not indirect speech anymore. But instead of saying, hey, tell me the font size, it's like instead of having to infer what font size means, what are the mechanics of this, it looks into the foundation document. Oh, this is what font size means. This is what A means. This is what the difference between A and NAV is, or whatever, right? And getting to this and having it AI not confabulate some stuff, but like to have this really grounded in the best possible foundational knowledge you can. You have to manufacture how is this deep research even generated, which is the part of like, okay, my deep research methodology being translated into a prompt, generating the deep research for the domain knowledge, which is then in turn used to build the actual agent, and then the agent is actually executed. Again, here it's executed in Clay, producing the data. The data is verified. This is another agent that is actually also in this document. Here you have the output schema. You have the field mappings to HubSpot. This is specifically for a specific HubSpot instance where I'm writing this into, but it can be adapted to, of course, any HubSpot instance. And then we have a verification agent that separately pokes holes into what the first agent did. But all of that, even that architecture, has to be in here somewhere to get that right. And that, to me, it's a little bit of a mix of architecture and nested context, but specifically this concept of having context build higher value chains. This is what it does. Same question, different answer. Without nested context, you ask, what is this firm's latest fund? And it says growth equity partners 300 million. Okay, but then the actual answer is, what is this firm's latest fund? And what we want is the headline fund, or the headline fund is the wrong term, but the main fund, and then the flagship fund. And then it says, hey, this is the name of the flagship fund. This is the number. This is the value, because it understands better that it's not a certain type of fund. So this is an actual quote. When you look for the latest flagship fund, the platform might identify something that's the latest, but it's actually just a continuation vehicle or some other thing, meaning there's like some expansion of a previous fund, but it's not actually the flagship fund. And this knowledge is actually codified here in this foundational document that has been manufactured along the way. And this is how I think about nested context. In this case, it's the fund taxonomy, the source hierarchy, the verification logic, the size interpretation, the extraction patterns, multi-strategy mapping. If like there is ambiguous information about the funds, it can disambiguate that and produce just these really higher quality outcomes. Nested context produces a high quality chain of intermediate artifacts that compound into better results. That's how I look at it. That's nested context. It's super powerful. Hope that was interesting and useful to somebody.